Chapter 8. Back in England, 1966, the year of miniskirts, mods and World Cup dreams, turning 10 came with one proper belter of a perk, eligibility to join the Sea Cadets. Johan and me, we'd been eyeballing it for ages, ever since a couple of lads from our class started strutting about like they were commanding the bleeding Royal Navy. They had this look, you know, all pressed trousers, shiny shoes and the smug air of someone who knows 42 different ways to tie a knot and where to stick a bosun's whistle. They'd bang on about parade drill and boat handling like it were top-secret military intel, and they'd flash their application forms around like they were maps to buried treasure. Sacred scrolls they were, needed a parental signature and a solemn promise not to blow anything up, not even accidentally. Turns out we could have joined at 9. 9! I mean, talk about missed opportunities. That felt like finding out the Beatles had played your local scout hut last week and no one bothered to tell you. But no matter, we weren't about to miss the boat again. We legged it home with our forms like we'd just been recruited by MI6, got our mums to sign the dotted line, and bang, we were Sea Cadets. Twice a week down the hall, wearing itchy jumpers and trying not to trip over our own enthusiasm. And it was brilliant, better than we'd imagined. The first time we stood in line for parade drill, all sharp turns and bellowing, "I, petty officer," like we'd been doing it for years, I nearly cried with joy. Not that I did, mind. Would have ruined me street cred. Marching, cleaning brass, learning fancy knots. It was like school, if school was run by sailors and actually fun. Johan was a natural, never seen someone salute with such flair. I, on the other hand, got my left and right mixed up during our first march in practice and nearly led half the unit into the broom cupboard. Still, spirits were high, uniforms were stiff, and we were officially boys of the sea, even if we'd not been within splashing distance of an actual boat yet. But give us time. It was 1966, England was on the rise, and two 10-year-old lads in oversized navy jumpers were ready to take on the world, one square knot at a time. We enrolled at TS Amethyst, our nearest Sea Cadet unit, though to us it might as well have been HMS Blinking Victory. The name alone sounded like we'd signed up to crew some gem-encrusted warship, probably powered by honour, discipline, and a healthy fear of the chief petty officer. First night we were handed our navy blue number, 8 uniforms. Royal Navy working dress, just without the diesel stink and occasional sea spray. They were stiff, slightly itchy, and made us look like very determined chimney sweeps with ambitions of command. I took great pride in learning how to shine me boots the proper just had a permanent, deep-seated grudge against anything that came with a cover, chapters, and an author. In Tim's eyes, a rugby ball had more to teach you than any textbook. And you know what? He might have had a point. That spring, Johan and I faced the mighty beast of childhood doom, the 11+ exam. The academic version of trial by fire, except instead of flames, you got sharpened pencils, scratchy paper, and the creeping fear that your entire future depended on remembering what a present participle was. Spoiler, I still don't know. The school assembly hall had been transformed into a sacred temple of torture. Desks spaced out with military precision, taped lines on the floor like it was a low-budget chess tournament, and the smell of nervous sweat wafting about like someone had boiled a school bag. At the front stood the adjudicator, perched on the stage like some high priest of doom, wearing a suit so stiff you could have shelved books on his shoulders. He had the expression of a man who'd banned joy in 1954 and never looked back. Mr. Forbes, our form master/disciplinarian-in-chief, marched around the room handing out exam papers face down like they were about to go off. Not a whisper, not a sneeze, just the collective dread of 30 kids wondering if algebra was going to ruin their lives. Some of my mates looked like they were going to spontaneously combust from sheer fear. You've never seen so many pale faces outside of a blackout drill. Johan, bless him, sat 3 desks over, cool as a cucumber in a snowstorm, didn't so much as twitch. I caught him glancing over his answers, flipping his paper shut just as I did, like we were part of a synchronized swimming team for nerds. After that, we just sat there, completely motionless, pretending to stare thoughtfully into the middle distance while trying desperately not to sneeze, cough, or blink too cleverly. We weren't allowed to leave early, oh no, so there we were, stuck in academic limbo, with nothing to do but wait and hope that the gods of grammar and arithmetic were feeling generous that day. That Easter holiday, with young Tim, now officially 9, and no longer needing to be smuggled into camp inside a kit bag, the 3 of us got packed off to a week-long sea cadet camp at HMS Ganges. And let me tell you, it was the stuff of nautical legend, sailing up and down the rivers Orwell, Devon and Stour like a trio of pint-sized pirates, dropping anchor wherever the breeze fancied and making landfall just often enough to grab emergency provisions. You know, mission-critical items like milk, rope and biscuits. Mostly biscuits. Now, we weren't chucked in with the big horrible lot, thank heavens. Tim, being fresh off the starting blocks, got assigned to our crew, which meant Johan and I could keep him out of trouble, and he could return the favour by asking wildly inappropriate questions at the worst possible times. Docking manoeuvres. Tim: what happens if we hit a whale? Tacking into the wind. Tim: can I steer now? Making tea? What's a gimbal? Is it going to blow up? We were kitted out in bright yellow wet weather gear, which once paired with our chunky life jackets made us look like a bunch of angry bananas in flotation devices. We didn't care, we were snug, we were seaworthy, and we were living the maritime dream. The cadets were split into crews of 5, each shoved aboard a 30-foot yacht with an instructor who'd clearly drawn the short straw and was now re-evaluating every life choice that had led them to this moment. But credit where it's due, they were patient, only sighed a bit, and rarely cried in public. Over the week, we got proper stuck in, took turns on the helm where Tim attempted a mutiny, learned to flake sails like pros, well, like slightly confused pros with tangled lines, sorted fenders without using them as makeshift oars, only once and it was Tim, and whipped out bowlines and reef knots faster than a greased ferret in a fish shop. The galley was a whole other story. Cooking on a swinging gas stove that looked like it came from a Bond villain's kitchen was character building. Nothing says breakfast like chasing your porridge round the hob while the boat heels over and Tim yells, "It's alive!" Evenings were pure bliss. We'd anchor in some peaceful cove, listen to the wading birds nattering, the rigging creaking like a pensioner's knees, and fall asleep with the scent of salt and the sting of sunburn. That is, after a spirited debate about who'd nicked the last custard cream. Before heading home, we even got a proper nosy around HMS Ganges itself, the famous Royal Navy training base. It was massive, impressive, and confirmed beyond all doubt that in the Navy everything important was shouted, from orders to breakfast rolls. If it didn't echo, you weren't doing it right. Our next Grand Sea Cadet caper had us scrubbed, brushed, boot polished and suited up tighter than a tin of sardines in our smartest number ones. We were off to Portsmouth's historic dockyard, and I'll tell you straight, we looked so sharp you could have sliced bread with our creases. I caught my reflection in a bus window and nearly saluted myself twice. The highlight of the day, aside from not tripping over in front of the commanding officer and becoming naval legend for all the wrong reasons, was the guided tour of a proper decommissioned submarine. Blimey, it was like crawling through a metal sausage roll. The corridors were so tight you couldn't even sneeze without elbowing someone into next Tuesday. But the best part, the former submariners who gave us the tour, absolute characters, all of them. Full of cheek grit and stories that'd make your nan drop her knitting. One lad asked, "Did anyone ever get stuck in the torpedo tube?" Without missing a beat, the old sailor goes, "Only once, and he came out a bit quicker than he went in." Cue howls of laughter and some slightly nervous glances at the torpedo bay. They answered every daft question with a smirk and a wink like they'd heard it all before and probably done most of it twice. You could tell they loved it, even the rough bits. And us lot. We were soaking it all up like wide-eyed naval sponges with ambitions far bigger than our boot size. And just when we thought the day couldn't get more brilliant, boom, they took us aboard HMS Victory. The actual Victory, Nelson's ship, wooden warship royalty, that one. There she was, standing proud in dry dock, smelling of tar, timber and 100% British glory. I swear I could hear the echoes of cannon fire and someone shouting, "England expects." All right, maybe it was just Tim muttering into his crisps, but still, it was proper magical. The guide told us about Horatio Nelson, all one eye, one arm and not a shred of fear. "A true British hero," he said, chest puffed out like he'd served beside him. I could have stayed on that ship forever. Every beam, every brass fitting, every creaky stair screamed adventure. If someone had handed me a telescope and a tricorn hat, I'd have climbed the rigging and declared myself admiral in about 5 minutes flat. We eventually disembarked, reluctantly, but heads full of tales and dreams of commanding our own fleet one day. Or at least a boat that didn't smell of Tim's socks and emergency biscuits, just when I thought the weekend couldn't possibly get any better. I mean, we'd already crawled through a blimmin' submarine and stood where Nelson himself once barked orders. They only went and chucked in another treat, a guided tour of HMS Warrior. Now, this weren't just any old ship, no sir. The HMS Warrior was the sports car of the Victorian Navy. Fast, sleek, and built to scare the breeches off anything that dared sail in its direction. A proper ironclad bruiser it was, with steam engines, cannon, and more shiny bits than a magpie's jewellery box. We stepped aboard, and I swear I could feel history humming through the floorboards. The place was stacked with decks, twisty little staircases, and so many levers and ropes I was tempted to start pulling things just to see what happened. Probably best I didn't. The guides, all proper old salts, former Royal Navy, the lot, they told stories like they'd lived them. One bloke was so passionate I half expected him to grab the wheel and shove off into the Solent with us still aboard. He had this wild look in his eye and kept calling the boiler room the belly of the beast. I loved it. We strolled out afterwards, boots clacking on the ancient cobblestones of Portsmouth dockyard, me head still spinning with images of sails billowing, engines roaring and dramatic shouts of "Stand by to repel boarders." It was like I'd been struck by a thunderbolt, but the good kind, the kind that makes everything suddenly clear. And that's when it happened, that proper, dramatic, life-changing realisation. This is where I belonged. I stopped in me tracks, looked out across the harbour and went, I'm going to join the Royal Navy. Didn't even think twice. Then, right on cue, Johan turns to me, cool as a cucumber on deck, and says, I was just thinking the same thing. And just like that, it was settled. 2 future admirals in the making. No beards yet, mind you, unless you count the fluff on Tim's upper lip, but we were ready to sail the world, command great ships, and maybe, just maybe, get our own submarines one day. one for each of us, with names like HMS Trouble and HMS Not On My Watch. By the time the Swedes arrived for the Easter long weekend, the house felt like it was already bursting at the seams. We'd only just got back from HMS Ganges and the historic dockyard in Portsmouth, still smelling faintly of tar, rope and the inside of a submarine, when the Volvo pulled up. First out was Eric, tall as ever, followed by Anna, who immediately pulled me into one of those hugs that makes you forget you're in your own driveway.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
The second Marlin and I spotted them, the world just tilted. Whatever clever thing I'd been saying vanished, and my legs were already moving. Boots pounding the path, hair whipping into my face. We crashed into Stephen and Johan like we were trying to make up for every day apart in one go. It wasn't just a hug. It was one of those rib-crushing, half-laughing, half-squeezing reunions that makes your chest ache in the best way. I buried my face into Stephen's shoulder and blurted, "I missed you," before I could stop myself. Marlin, meanwhile, had Johan half airborne, grinning so wide I thought his face might split. And then I noticed Petra. Her first time in England, and she was drinking it all in like the air itself was something new. Tim was there too, slouched against the garden gate, pretending he wasn't watching. But the second Petra smiled, he straightened like a soldier on parade. Their eyes caught, held just that little bit longer than polite, and I swear you could almost see the spark in the air between them. Johan's place was far too crowded for all of us, so we divvied things up. Petra ended up at Tim's with Phoebe and Susan, while Johan bunked in with Stephen. Marlin and I claimed Johan's old room. Fair's fair. And Papa and Mama took the guest room. Ronnie had stayed back in Sweden, which meant nobody had to draw the short straw of sharing with his snoring. From the moment bags hit the floor, it was organized chaos, the sort where every chair, mug, and slice of bread had to do double duty. And none of us minded in the least. By dinner time, the kitchen felt like a cafe on market day. Chairs borrowed from every room, plates balanced anywhere they'd fit, and the smell of roast lamb and mint sauce wrapping round us all like a blanket. We squeezed shoulder to shoulder at the table, passing dishes back and forth until it felt more like choreography than supper. Petra ended up between Tim and Phoebe, supposedly by chance, though the way Tim slid her chair out with all the manners of a film star made me suspect it wasn't entirely accidental. "First time in England, then?" he asked, leaning in to offer her the potatoes before anyone else had a chance. "Yes," Petra said, voice soft but certain. "It is busy. Noisy." She smiled around the table. "I like it." Tim, bless him, puffed up a little, then gave it his best shot. "Jag, hoppas, du gillar, England." The words were careful, clumsy, but perfectly clear. "I hope you like England." Petra's eyes widened, and the smile she gave him was enough to turn his ears scarlet. "Your Swedish is very good," she said, leaning a touch closer. He grinned like he'd just won a medal. "I learned from the best. Well, from Ingrid when I was little. Haven't used it much since." "You should practice," Petra teased, though there was a serious note in it too. "Oh, I can do that," Tim replied, like a lad who'd just been dared into something he was delighted to accept. The rest of us carried on chatting, but it was impossible not to notice the way they kept stealing glances, tiny smiles darting between them. The spark was already there. You didn't need to be clever to see it. Saturday we all trooped down to the market. The place was alive, stallholders bellowing, onions frying at the burger van, strawberries being flogged 3 punnets for £1. Tim and Petra drifted a few steps ahead, heads close, stopping now and then at the stalls. Tim was clearly determined to impress with more than just, hello and thank you. He pointed at a basket of scones. Vad, det där? Petra smiled, the word soft in her accent. It is a scone. Tim nodded gravely, then broke into a grin. Jack Giller scones. Med silt. I like scones with jam. Petra laughed, hand over her mouth. Very good, but you must say cream also. It is important here, yes? Oh, very important, Tim said, eyes dancing. In fact, I could show you the right way to eat one. Maybe later, if you fancy a walk. She tilted her head, curious. Where would we walk? Rugby club's just down the road, Tim said. Quiet there this time of day. Good place for a chat. And maybe a cream tea if we pass the bakery on the way back. Petra smiled, that same soft smile from the night before. Okay, she said simply. And just like that, the rest of the market seemed to fade a little. The noise, the stalls, even the shouts of the strawberry seller, leaving just the two of them strolling side by side. The spark from last night was still there. And now it had somewhere to go. The lane to the rugby club wound away from the bustle of the market, past neat rows of brick houses and gardens just waking up for spring. The noise of the stalls faded behind them, replaced by the caw of a crow on a telegraph pole and the steady crunch of their shoes on the pavement. For the first few minutes they didn't say much, just a couple of small smiles when their eyes met, like they were both trying to find the right starting point. Tim kicked at a stray pebble, then glanced sideways at her. So, you ever played rugby before? He asked, figuring she'd say no. Petra's eyes lit up. Yes, a little. When Johan and Stephen came to Sweden in the summers, they taught us. We played in the field by the lake. Tim raised his eyebrows. Proper rugby? Proper enough, Petra said with a small grin. I can run, catch, and tackle. Vinka says I am better at tackling than some boys. Tim laughed, shaking his head. Now I've got to see that, though maybe not if you're aiming for me. Maybe, she said, the word drawn out in a way that made it sound like both a challenge and a promise. They reached the club gates, the pitch stretched out in front of them, empty except for the post standing tall against the pale blue sky. Tim led her along the edge, pointing out where the try line was, where the best view from the stands could be had. Petra listened, but he noticed she looked around more than at the pitch, taking in the rows of trees beyond, the little clubhouse with its peeling paint, the whole picture. It's peaceful, she said at last. Yeah, Tim agreed, watching her rather than the view. It is. And in that quiet moment, with the spring air cool on their faces and the space between them feeling smaller than it had at dinner or the market, Tim knew he wanted a lot more walks like this. Maybe even a game or two of rugby with her on his team. They'd only just stepped back through the rugby club gates when Petra stopped in the middle of the path and gave Tim a sideways look. So, she said, her voice all innocent, if I was running with the ball, how would you stop me? Tim smirked. Easy, I'd catch you. Before he could say more, she darted ahead, weaving between the trees that lined the path. Then catch me, she called over her shoulder, laughing. Tim gave chase, his boots thudding on the gravel, the gap between them closing slowly. She zigzagged like she was already in a match, dodging an invisible defense. He lunged once and missed, nearly tripping over a tree root. Too slow, Englishman, she teased in perfect English and took off again. Finally, just before the road back to the market, he caught her by the arm and spun her gently to a stop. Got you? He said, grinning like a lad who'd just scored the winning try. Petra laughed, catching her breath. Maybe, but only because I let you. Oh, yeah? Tim stepped back, mock offended. We'll see about that next time we've got a ball between us. She smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. Next time, you will be on my team. Then you will see how
the garage, building a scale model of HMS Victory out of matchsticks and muttering it never left port in the first place. Of course, not everyone agreed with us. Susan called us traitors. Phoebe told me I was basically German. And our neighbour, Mr. Watkins, tried to have a friendly chat about the final. I told him I'd rather watch paint dry on a canoe. He didn't speak to me for a week, but we didn't care. We were proudly, passionately, and gloriously anti-football. While the rest of the nation kicked off, we set sail. Metaphorically, of course, because some of us were dreaming not of Wembley glory, but of gun decks, mainsails, and a Royal Navy commission. Now, while Johan and I were begrudgingly enduring the national football hysteria from the safety of the back garden, Tim had wisely opted out entirely, holding up in Tony's shed with his usual partners in chaos, Tony and John. Now, you've got to understand, Tim wasn't one for football, books, or quiet hobbies. His idea of fun involved chemicals, questionable safety practices, and a distinct risk of singeing your eyebrows off. That afternoon, they were concocting what they proudly called a controlled experiment, a mixture of weed killer, sugar, and cooking oil, stirred together in an old metal tray like some kind of unholy treacle tart. Overseeing the operation was Tony's one-eyed cat, Churchill, perched on the shelf like a furry skeptic. Then it happened. From the living room came this almighty roar. England had scored. The three of them dropped their spoons, kicked over a funnel, and legged it to the telly to see what all the fuss was about. And that's when Churchill, clearly fed up with being ignored and possibly harbouring anarchist tendencies, gave the tray a casual nudge. What followed? Well, let's just say it weren't exactly controlled. There was a flash of light, a thunderclap like the heavens were falling in, and then the entire shed lifted clean off its foundations, windows bursting outward like it was auditioning for a war film. Half the street ducked. Mrs. Johnson nearly launched herself into the rose bushes, and the blast wave knocked Tony's dad's rhubarb into next week. By the time the smoke cleared, all that was left of the shed was a scorched patch of gravel, a twisted spade, and Churchill strutting off unharmed with his tail held high, like he'd just liberated France. Needless to say, the boys got an earful. Tony was grounded, John had his chemistry set confiscated, and Tim had to apologise in writing to 3 neighbours, a postman and the cat. But in true British fashion, the fact England actually went on to win the match meant the grown-ups decided to call it just one of those things. A bit of celebration spirit, they said. Besides, no one really liked that shed anyway. Now things really went sideways one Tuesday lunchtime. See, Johan and I had had enough. The entire playground had turned into a boot fest. 20 lads chasing after a half-deflated leather orb like it held the secret to eternal happiness. Footballs flying, jumpers for goalposts, and the sound of someone yelling, "Save!" every 20 seconds like they were auditioning for the pulpit. So we did what any sensible rugby-loving sea cadet would do. We brought our rugby ball in, a glorious gaffer-taped beast of a thing, battle-scarred, slightly egg-shaped, well, more egg than shape, and perfect for a proper game. No diving, no rolling around like you'd been hit by a feather, just good honest tackling and the odd muddy elbow. We claimed the top corner of the field, where the grass was less field and more ex-bog, and started passing the ball about. Johan threw a beautiful spiral my way. I caught it like a champ, and we were off, sidestepping between nettle patches, pretending we were in the 5 Nations. Then it happened. The ball slipped, bounced off a rock, took a wicked turn, and flew beautifully, majestically, right into the middle of pitch 1, where Year 6 were mid-football final, and Craig the Boot Preston was lining up a penalty shot like he was Bobby Charlton reincarnated. Whack, rugby ball meets football. Football soars. Craig misses. The Year 6s explode. What was that? Oi, who brought that bloody egg in? My dearest Vinka, you are not going to believe what happened today. In years to come, bards will sing of it, statues will be erected, and Miss Jenkins will still be finding conkers in her handbag from the aftermath. I give you the great playground riot of '66. It began, innocently enough, with Johan and me attempting to educate the footballing masses in the noble art of rugby. Picture it, the Year 6 pitch, a light drizzle, for atmosphere, and me cradling the ball like a proud father who's just discovered his newborn can sidestep. I spotted a gap, glided through it like a swan on roller skates, and, just as I prepared to crown it goal of the century, I know it's not called a goal in rugby, but allow me some poetry, who should blunder across my line but Craig the boot, waving his shin pads like royal warrants and yelling, "You ruined the goal of the century." Next thing we know, half the playground is charging at us like we've insulted the Queen and unplugged Top of the Pops mid-chorus. Johan and I legged it. We zigzagged through the netball courts like hunted men, skirts flapping, the hoops skirts, not ours, and I clutched the ball to my chest like it was the crown jewels, and I was an underpaid beefeater with performance anxiety. Enter Tim, God bless that chaotic cherub, who joined the rearguard action wielding a stick he swore was Excalibur and shouting, "You'll never take us alive," at a crowd of very alive Year 5s. It was glorious, it was chaotic, it was a ballet of elbows and muddy socks. At one point I hurdled a lunchbox, Johan sidestepped a dinner lady, and Tim attempted a cavalry charge on a space hopper. Historians will argue whether the bounce helped. I can confirm it did not. Then came the authorities. Miss Jenkins blew her whistle so hard she nearly swallowed it and turned a worrying shade of beetroot. Mr. Forbes materialised from the staff room like a storm cloud in tweed. Cap on, eyebrows at national emergency. He declared with Churchillian gravity that all rugby balls were henceforth banned. Banned Vinka, our beautiful ovals, exiled like misunderstood avant-garde fruit. Judgment was swift. A week of litter duty for me, Johan and Tim. Sentence accepted with the dignity of fallen generals. We saluted the assembled masses who booed and marched off to collect orange peel and mystery wrappers, while Forbes lectured us on appropriate playground pursuits, which, ironically, sounded more dangerous than anything we'd actually done. But here's the best bit. The legend refused to die. The Year 5s immediately launched a No Football Thursdays protest. I think they meant well, but got lost in the slogans. Tim drafted a constitution for a rugby-only club, complete with a logo, a motto in broken Latin, Ovolo Glorio, and membership fees payable in curly whirlies, and someone, almost certainly Craig, who handles chalk the way Julius Caesar handled Gaul, scrawled "oval balls are rubbish" across the bike shed, to which an unknown hero later added, "Said no hero ever." So that was my day. Part epic, part farce, wholly muddy. My knees look like they've been borrowed from a coal miner, and Mum says my blazer now smells like wet dog in negotiation with cabbage. On the bright side, litter duty is excellent conditioning. I've developed a powerful lunge for elusive crisp packets and a devastating stare for anyone who litters within a 5-yard radius. I wish you'd been here to see it. You'd have laughed yourself inside out, then calmly organised us into a proper defensive line, probably using a netball post as a makeshift ruck marker and Miss Jenkins as a decoy runner. Next time you're over, bring your Aikido calm. I'll bring the escape route. Until then, consider this my sworn statement. I did not ruin the goal of the century. I merely upgraded it to a legend. Love, still banned, still proud, still muddy, Stephen. P.S. Tell Petra that Tim's battle cry is available for weddings, fates and small revolutions. Fee negotiable in jam tarts. We just smiled, because we knew, deep down, we'd started a revolution. A few weeks later, just as the daffs were drooping and everyone was too busy playing conkers with leftover rugby balls, the 11+ results finally landed, plopping onto doormats like little paper grenades, and blow me down with a grammar school pencil sharpener. Johan and I only went and aced it, top of the tree, head of the pack, cream of the snotty-nosed crop. Our mums near burst with pride, and Mr. Forbes finally smiled, although it looked more like wind. We were officially bound for Hitchin Boys Grammar, a place we'd built up in our heads as some sort of scholarly fortress, like a cross between Tom Brown's school days and a military academy, only with more blazers and less caning. I imagined Latin pouring out of every classroom like soup in a canteen, and rugby balls being lovingly hand-stitched by wise old masters who quoted Caesar with one hand and stirred their tea with the other. In our minds, it was going to be all epic traditions, oak-panelled corridors, and the faint but permanent smell of chalk and ambition. Some of the girls in our class were off to the girls' grammar half a mile away, reputedly a strict institution, though judging by the rumours it had more in common with St Trinian's than a Swiss finishing school, stockings, sarcasm, and no shortage of eyebrow-raising antics if the stories were to be believed. All in all, it felt like we were heading into some grand new chapter, uniforms pressed, hair combed, and completely unprepared for whatever came next. Some of the other lads and girls were off to the new secondary modern, which looked more like a glorified office block than a centre of learning. But still, spirits were high, and with the great exam beast finally slain, our last term at junior school turned into one long knees up. We signed shirts, nicked chalk, got told off for nicking chalk, and every day someone tried to climb the bike shed just to see what was up there, usually followed by a trip to the nurse. Best bit, the coach trip to the Science Museum in London. Now, I'd been before a few times, usually on educational jaunts that ended with me stuck in the gift shop trying to choose between a magnet shaped like an atom or a pencil that looked like a rocket. But I loved it. Every button begged to be pressed, which I did, obviously. Every exhibit made me feel like a brainy spy in training. I even stood in front of the big Apollo rocket display and declared quite loudly, "One day I'll go into space, if the Navy doesn't mind." A random lady clapped. Johan just rolled his eyes and said, "You'd forget your helmet." Still, we practiced our Morse code on the coach ride home, much to the annoyance of everyone within earshot, and Craig nicked a leaflet to make paper planes out of. It was the perfect send-off, science, sweets, and a sandwich that smelt suspiciously like last Tuesday's socks. To cap it all off, our class put on an end-of-term production of Treasure Island, though I'm not sure Robert Louis Stevenson would have recognised it, unless he'd been hit on the head with a frying pan first. It was more Pantomime Island, really. There were pirates, parrots, and an utterly baffling dance number halfway through that I'm pretty sure was lifted from Top of the Pops. Still, the girls loved it, and who were we to argue? Anything to avoid actual lessons. Naturally, Johan and I were cast as pirates, what with our flair for drama and a shared ability to shout, "Ah!" loud enough to rattle the staff room windows. Our job was to stomp about the stage like two lads 3 sheets to the wind, though in reality we were just hopped up on 2 cups of orange squash and a Kit Kat. We practiced staggering convincingly, which mostly meant bumping into props and narrowly avoiding a dramatic tumble off the front of the stage. It weren't Shakespeare, but we gave it welly. The dress rehearsal was held in front of the entire school and, well, let's just say things didn't exactly go to plan. Lines were forgotten, cues were missed, and half the cast decided to just make it up as they went along. One lad delivered his monologue while still wearing his school jumper and forgot to take off his glasses, so our villainous sea dog looked more like a confused geography teacher. To everyone's surprise, the improvised chaos had the younger years in absolute hysterics. Some were laughing so hard they had to be peeled off the floor. Mr. Forbes, in an uncharacteristic burst of optimism, or sheer resignation, declared the changes unexpectedly inspired and kept them in for the final show. By the time the curtain rose for the parents, Treasure Island had mutated into a full-blown comedy. Long John Silver winked at the audience, cracked a joke about fish fingers and asked if anyone had seen his parrot. "He owes me rent," he shouted, and the mums nearly wet themselves. It was daft, it was loud, it was blooming brilliant, and as we stood there at the end taking our final bow in pirate hats and beards made of suspiciously itchy felt, I realised this was it, the last hurrah, the final chaos of junior school, wrapped up in laughter and sea shanties. Walking out of those school gates for the very last time, I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to stop my chin wobbling. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Felt like closing the book on the first chapter of our lives. A bit messy, a bit loud, but absolutely magic. That summer holiday promised to be about as relaxing as a ferret in a fireworks factory. We were straight into the thick of it with a week-long sea cadet camp in Montrose, Scotland, home of bagpipes, midges and rowing drills that made your arms feel like they'd been swapped for sausages. The moment school let out, we legged it home, grabbed our kits and were bundled off to King's Cross, quicker than you could say, "Where's me flask?" We boarded the overnight train to Edinburgh like three wide-eyed adventurers on a mission from the Admiralty, or at least our unit officer. By 6 a.m. we were knackered, half asleep and smelling strongly of egg sandwiches and boot polish. Still, we pressed on, changing trains in Edinburgh and then a train bound for Aberdeen, getting out at Montrose like conquering heroes or sweaty, sleep-deprived children. Now, when they said we'd be put up in the drill hall, we imagined something posh. Floors you could eat your dinner off, proper bunks, maybe even a kettle. What we got was hammocks, actual hammocks, like the Navy used back when Nelson still had two eyes. It was like trying to sleep in a bouncy castle made of string. First night was total carnage, lads dropping out of their slings like sacks of spuds. All you could hear was thud, ow, and the occasional "I'm all right," uttered in a tone that suggested otherwise. Johan got the hang of it after a couple nights lying there smug as you like. I, however, had a technique that mostly involved getting tangled, swearing under my breath and swinging like a confused fruit bat. And little Tim, he managed to fall out 3 times and still claimed he was having the best sleep of his life. Madness. Now let's talk about the boats. The Montrose cadets had proper Navy-style rowing skiffs, big, heavy things with oars longer than your average estate car. Rowing the Royal Navy way meant everyone had to row together, no freelancing, no faffing, and absolutely no clocking your mate on the back of the head with an oar, which sadly happened more than once. It was half drill, half musical chairs with paddles. When we weren't rowing, we were zipping about the harbour in sailing dinghies like we were auditioning for Swallows and Amazons, the reboot. I helmed a dual-hander with Tim as crew. He nearly capsized us showing off, but to be fair, he looked like he was born for the water, right up until he fell in it. The Montrose lot were grand, friendly, full of beans, and just competitive enough to make races fun without anyone going full mutiny. We learned a lot that week, how to tie off fenders properly, trim a mainsail, and most importantly, how to climb back into a dinghy without flashing your Sea Cadet issue undies to the entire East Coast. By the end of it, we were sunburnt, salt-crusted, and buzzing with stories. Tim declared it the best week of his life, despite the hammock incidents. And I couldn't argue. It was muddy, it was messy, it was proper Sea Cadet magic. We took the night train home on Sunday and rolled in Monday morning looking like a trio of moth-eaten scarecrows, bleary-eyed, crumpled to bits and smelling of sea salt, stale crisps and the kind of adventure you can't wash off in one go. You'd think we'd get a day to recover, maybe even locate our own beds. But no. Before we could say, "Where's me pillow?" Mum and Ingrid had already mobilised. It was full steam ahead into Operation Grammar School, kitted up, launched with the sort of urgency normally reserved for flood warnings or missing budgies. So there we were, still half dreaming of rowing drills and hammock injuries, being marched round shops like a pair of weary mannequins. Johan's mum had the look of a woman on a mission, and Mum, well, she was waving receipts like a field marshal with a shopping list. Now, if you've never been kitted out for grammar school in the mid-60s, count yourself lucky. The school outfitters in town was a dusty, echoey little shop that smelled of mothballs, shoe polish and quiet suffering. The walls were stacked with perfectly folded jumpers and grey flannel trousers, watched over by a bloke who looked like he'd been issuing tape measures since ration books were still a thing. Mr. Latchford, the brass name tag said, but between us he might as well have been called General No-Nonsense. The moment we walked in, Mum's back went ramrod straight. "Stand up smart," she whispered like we were infiltrating enemy lines, "and don't touch anything unless it asks politely." Johan had that wary look like he was stepping into a medical exam. He drifted over to a rack of caps, cautiously inspecting them like one might a row of ferrets. Me? I was already eyeing the exit. Mr. Latchford swooped in with a tape measure and a stare that could starch a shirt. "Measurements, young gentleman. Quickly now. Inside leg, arm span, collar, hat size." Johan muttered something in Swedish that sounded suspiciously like a curse. I tried not to laugh while getting my shoulder nearly dislocated trying to escape a blazer that seemed to have been stitched from sandpaper and regret. Mum wasn't having it, declared it was roomy, which of course is code for you'll be swimming in it till you're shaving. By the end we were armed with the lot. 2 blazers with school crests, itchy grey pullovers, regulation caps, gym kit complete with plimsolls, and socks long enough to knit a scarf with. The shoes were black leather lace-ups that squeaked with every step and made you feel like a bank clerk in training. Still, as we staggered out the shop, loaded with bags and stiff collars, it felt like something real was happening. Uncomfortable? Definitely. Embarrassing? A bit. But this was it. Grammar school was no longer just a rumour. It was stitched, buttoned and scowling at us from a carrier bag. Why the panic? Because that very evening, while most sensible people were having a nap and a biscuit, we were boarding the ferry from Harwich to Gothenburg. 5 glorious weeks in Sweden lay ahead. And let me tell you, we were about as prepared as a goldfish at a cat convention. Our suitcases were so heavy they needed their own passports. We rolled up to Harwich like 2 10-year-old international men of mystery, clutching our ferry tickets and trying not to trip over our overpacked duffel bags. As always, Olaf was waiting at the other end, cheerful as a Christmas elf, arms open and ready to whisk us off to the family reunion. And what a reunion it was. Everyone was there. Vinka, Marlin, Petra, Sven, the lot, all a bit older, maybe a smidge taller, but still loud enough to make the ferry horn blush. It was like being dropped back into the middle of a Swedish sitcom. Equal parts hugs, chaos, and someone shouting for more biscuits. The big plan? Another sailing adventure. Only this time we weren't just the muscle-fetching ropes and scrubbing decks. No, sir, we were navigators, proper ones, with charts and compasses and everything. Eric let us plan real passages, like junior versions of Shackleton, minus the frostbite.
Petra, glancing around, noticing Tim's absence. "Stephen, why didn't Tim come to Sweden with you this summer?"
Mum wouldn't let him, said he's off down to Grandad's for the summer instead.
"Oh."
He told me to say he was sorry.
"I was looking forward to seeing him again."
"You should write to him, might cheer him up, stuck there with nothing but Grandad's pigs for company."
"All right, I will." "Dear Tim, Stephen told me you've been sent down to your granddad's for the summer and that you're very sorry you couldn't come to Sweden. I suppose I can forgive you, but only because I imagine you're knee-deep in mud, feeding pigs and smelling like you've been rolled in bacon. I was looking forward to seeing you again after Easter. It was nice having someone else around who could almost keep up with Stephen and Johan's nonsense. You made me laugh, and that's not easy when I'm jet-lagged and surrounded by 2 very competitive rugby players. Stephen says I should write to you so you don't get too bored. So here's my mission. You must write back and tell me all about your summer. In return, I'll send you updates from Sweden, which so far include sunshine, far too much coffee, and Johan falling off the pier. Ask Stephen, he'll give you the full story. If you behave and write neatly, I might even send a photo. If you don't, I'll send one of Stephen in his worst jumper. Yours for now, Petra. P.S. Stephen says you're learning Swedish. If that's true, I expect a sentence in your next letter. No cheating with the dictionary.
Dear Petra, I got your letter this morning. Nearly lost it to a pig who fancied the envelope, and it cheered me right up. I've been here a week, and already I think Grandad's pigs are plotting against me. They're cleverer than they look. One of them can undo the gate latch. I'm not saying it's a genius, but if it starts smoking a pipe and reading the paper, I'm running away. Now, Stephen probably told you Mum wouldn't let me go to Sweden this summer. What he didn't say was why. Apparently, after the incident, the one during the World Cup when the chemistry set and the shed had a disagreement, I'm now considered a flight risk. Mum said sending me to Sweden was asking for international consequences. So instead, I'm shoveling muck for Grandad and smelling like a bacon factory. Yes, it smells, constantly. My clothes have taken on a permanent eau de pigsty that no amount of soap will shift. I reckon even Johan's rugby socks would be jealous. I was disappointed not to come to Sweden. After Easter, I thought maybe I'd see you again this summer, but Mum was adamant, said I'd learn some responsibility here. So far, that's meant shoveling things I won't describe in case you're eating while you read this. I'll take you up on your challenge to write in Swedish. Here goes. Du är rolig och jag vill träffa dig igen. Stephen can tell you if I've just proposed marriage by accident. Send that photo you promised, preferably one without Stephen's ugly jumper in it. I'll send you one of me with the pigs. Consider it a fair trade. Yours in mud and scandal, Tim. P.S. If you come to the farm one day, I'll introduce you to Matilda. She's the clever pig. Don't look her in the eye. She'll know all your secrets.
Dear Tim, your letter made me laugh so much I nearly spilled coffee on it, which would have been a shame because I want to keep it as evidence of the great shed explosion of 66. Now I understand why you weren't allowed to come to Sweden. I have to admit, international consequences sounds very dramatic. Were you planning on blowing up one of our sheds too, just for symmetry? I read your Swedish sentence. Congratulations. You didn't accidentally propose marriage. Though I'm not sure I want to meet you again is much safer. You realize that if you keep this up, I might have to start teaching you the really dangerous phrases. Stephen told me you're knee-deep in pigs and muck, and I think you're secretly enjoying it. Don't deny it. I can picture you now leading the pig rebellion, Matilda by your side, plotting your escape to Sweden in a hot air balloon made of feed sacks. I'll send you the promised photo soon, but only if you promise to keep it out of Matilda's reach. I have a feeling she'd frame it and put it in the sty just to annoy you. Write again soon. I'd hate to think all your spare time was spent shoveling instead of trying to impress me. Yours, still Petra. P.S. If your mum ever changes her mind, bring earplugs. Johan and Stephen's early morning singing is enough to make anyone consider detonating another shed.
Dear Petra, first of all, you should know, I am deeply offended that you think I'd blow up one of your sheds just for symmetry. I'd blow up too, so you wouldn't feel lopsided. That's just basic courtesy. Glad to hear my Swedish didn't get me married without knowing it, although if you were to teach me the really dangerous phrases, I'd be all ears. Might even take notes. Matilda sends her regards. By sends her regards, I mean she tried to eat your letter when I read it out loud. I think she's jealous, or hungry, or both. And for the record, I am not enjoying the muck. I am tolerating it with the dignity of a man who has been sentenced to a summer of shoveling as penance for scientific ambition. A hot air balloon escape to Sweden is tempting, though. You'd see me coming from miles away. Me in a basket, Matilda wearing goggles, and the whole thing smelling like bacon. Send that photo soon. I'll keep it somewhere safe, somewhere Matilda can't reach. Probably. Here's one of me and Matilda just for you. Yours under surveillance, Tim. P.S. If Johan and Stephen's early morning singing is that bad, I'll bring my rugby whistle. Trust me, it works faster than any alarm clock. Now, we might have taken a tiny, very minor detour round a small island we hadn't planned to see, but we called it tactical sightseeing, gave it a confident nod, and pressed on like true pros. And when our penciled lines on the chart actually matched the world beneath the keel, blimey, what a feeling. Better than scoring a try at Twickenham with the Queen in the stands. Nobody got lost, nobody threw up, nobody accidentally set fire to the galley. That, my friend, is what we call progress. Ronnie didn't tag along this year. He was almost 14 now, which apparently meant he'd ascended to the sacred realm of too cool for family holidays. He'd chosen instead to gallivant off with his mates, no doubt living on snacks, mischief, and the kind of sunburn you pretend is a tan. That left us with a leaner crew, Eric as our capable skipper and the not-so-merry band of 5, Vinka, Marlin, Petra, Johan, and yours truly. Thankfully, the boat weren't too cramped, though getting ready in the morning did feel like staging Oliver in a phone box. You'd get one foot in your trousers and suddenly someone would elbow you in the side trying to find their other sock, a ballet of elbows, toothpaste and muttered apologies. But the weather, oh the weather, sunshine that could melt your freckles, breezes soft as butter and not a grumble from the skies. We soaked it all up like solar-powered sailors, living off fresh air, the odd sandwich, and the thrill of shouting, ready about, like we knew what we were doing. Now, Eric, who worked over at the Hallberg Rasi yard with Olaf, had only gone and borrowed one of their gorgeous yachts for our trip. I mean, this wasn't a boat, it was a floating palace, all gleaming teak, polished brass, and ropes that didn't look like they'd been through a hedge. It was like learning to drive in a Rolls-Royce, only with seagulls and the occasional jellyfish. We learned loads, laughed constantly, and fell completely in love with sailing all over again, especially since Eric mysteriously forgot to teach us the finer points of doing the washing up. Can't say we minded. Once we'd worked out where the loo was without falling in and finally stopped shouting, "Abandon ship!" Every time we caught a wave, things settled into a right rhythm. We rotated duties like pros, helming, navigating, anchoring, chart plotting, and yelling helpful nautical things like, "Tie that thingy to the what's-it." Vinka, of course, turned out to be a proper natural. She had the helm like it was part of her, calm as a cucumber in a snowstorm, sharp with the charts, smooth on the tiller, and somehow able to give orders without sounding like she was giving orders. We didn't vote on it or nothing, but if the boat had a crown, we'd have chucked it at her and called her Queen of the Baltic right then and there. Now young Petra, bless her cotton socks, had just turned 9, same as Tim, and decided, off her own bat, mind you, that she was now some sort of bilingual ambassador in training. She'd started learning English at school, very official-like, and with the confidence of someone who'd just conquered the alphabet, she asked us all to speak English around her for practice. Well, what could we say? The girl had determination, a dictionary, and eyes like she was interviewing for the United Nations. Vinka and Marlin were already getting on famously with their English. Johan and I took full credit for that, naturally. I mean, we'd been yapping away at them for years like unpaid tutors with dodgy accents. So we agreed. From that moment on, it was English only. No more jar and tax-a-mickey. We were full-blown, tea-sipping Queen's English speakers. Well, sort of. Petra lapped it up. We gave polite corrections. She gave us grammar tests. We exaggerated our encouragement like we were on a BBC language show. "Well done, Petra. That's the past participle, you clever clogs." And then promptly froze whenever she corrected our English. Honestly, nothing quite knocks your confidence like a 9-year-old calmly explaining your misuse of the present perfect tense. I nearly dropped me jam sandwich in shock. And between you and me, I reckon the little madam had a bit of a crush on yours truly, just 'cause Tim wasn't here. She'd get all bashful if I asked her to pass the butter, and once she offered to translate my entire diary, just for fun. I handled it with the grace and poise of a boy, desperately pretending not to notice while quietly considering fleeing the country. Still, you had to admire her. Sharp as a tack, bright as a button, and polite to a fault. I had visions of her one day giving a speech at the United Nations while I sat at the back, sweating through my shirt and wondering if she was still mentally marking my grammar. Our week of sailing flew by quicker than a rope slipping through the hands of a rookie who thinks a clove hitch is something you get at the butcher's. We came off that boat bronzed like a tray of Sunday spuds, reeking of salt, sunshine, and questionable hygiene. Felt like proper sailors, we did. Well, maybe not admiral material, but we could definitely blag a role in the background of a BBC yachting documentary, standing there nodding seriously while pointing at a compass. With the rest of the summer stretching out like a lazy cat in a sunbeam, we spent our days loafing about on the beach, taking tactical dips in the swimming holes and trying not to get sunburned in weird shapes. Johan and me had packed our faithful size 3 rugby ball, bless it, barely held together by a few stitches, a bit of gaffer tape, and sheer optimism. That ball had more miles on it than a London taxi. Naturally, we kicked off a bit of touch rugby on the sand. Vinka and Marlin got stuck in straight away, couldn't resist the chaos, and before long we'd roped in half the local kids. They were flying about like they were in the home nations, only with more sand in uncomfortable places. We didn't exactly stick to the rules, mind you. There were moves that would have made a referee cry, but blimey, we had a laugh. When the time came to pack up and head home, we left the old ball behind. It deserved a dignified retirement, like an old war horse getting one last gallop. We donated it to the beach mob with a rousing speech and possibly a tear or two. To top it off, Johan and I pooled our pocket money and posted Vinka and Marlin a copy of How to Play Touch Rugby, in Swedish no less. Might have been the first ever rugby textbook with sand stuck in the spine. Whether they actually read it, used it as a drinks coaster, or propped up a wobbly table, we may never know, but we like to think we sparked a Swedish rugby revolution. Who knows, maybe one day there'll be a statue of that scruffy little ball standing proud outside a stadium in Helios. The last morning arrived far too quickly, like someone had yanked the summer out from under us. The sun was shining, mockingly cheerful, as if it hadn't got the memo that we were about to leave pieces of ourselves behind. The bags were packed, shoes reluctantly polished, and the car loaded down like we were evacuating rather than just going home. Johan and I stood awkwardly at the edge of the gravel drive, pretending to fuss with our satchels while trying not to look at the girls. Vinka had her arms folded, biting the inside of her cheek. She always did that when she was trying not to cry. I could see the shimmer in her eyes, though, same as mine. "So," I muttered, dragging the toe of my shoe across the gravel. "I guess this is it, again." She stepped closer, reaching up to adjust the collar of my shirt, like she always did at goodbyes. "You're right," she said. Not a question, a command wrapped in hope. "Every week," I promised, my throat tight. "Even if I've got nothing to say, I'll still send something." Marlin was already crying, her face buried in Johan's shoulder, mumbling in Swedish between sobs. Johan stood there, blinking furiously and trying to play it cool, but I could see his jaw twitching. He always cried from the neck up. Then Vinka did something that undid me completely. She reached up, kissed me lightly on the lips, and whispered, "Don't forget this time." "I couldn't if I tried," I said, barely holding it together. "You're in everything now." We hugged, tight and lingering, the kind of hug that tries to defy time. When we finally pulled apart, I saw the tears rolling down her cheeks, and mine weren't far behind. I turned away before I completely lost it and climbed into the car beside Johan, who was already wiping his eyes and trying to act like it was just hay fever. As the car pulled away, the girls stood there in the drive, arms wrapped around each other, waving through the blur of sunlight and tears. I pressed my hand to the window. She pressed hers back. And just like that, summer was over. The future loomed in grey flannel and long socks, but my heart was still standing in Sweden, wearing a red knitted hat and holding a piece of me I'd never get back.